King Charles has named his youngest brother, Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, a title held, of course, by his late father, Prince Philip, for more than 70 years. It had been the late Prince's wish for Prince Edward to be granted the dukedom after his death.
Buckingham Palace had not seen a family gathering dissolve so suddenly since the reign of Edward VII. On a grey, rain-streaked morning last November, Prince Edward was observed departing the quadrangle, his expression unmistakably tense, a car door shutting with enough force to reverberate beneath the stone facade. Moments before, his sister, Princess Anne, had gathered her briefing papers, offered a measured nod to the footman, and walked without a word back toward her office in the palace's east wing. What had erupted behind those gilded doors, according to several sources familiar with the situation, was yet another stalemate with their older brother, King Charles III, over a single burning question. When, if ever, will their late mother's sealed document be opened for the very heirs it names? For 18 months, the monarch has leaned on a century-old legal convention permitting senior royal wills to remain locked within a high court strong room for a period of 90 years. 2. Judges have already affirmed the secrecy arrangement, invoking the dignity of the sovereign as their justification. The procedure may be entirely lawful, yet among Charles's siblings, it carries the weight of something far more deliberate. They have already seen the inventory. More than 400 pieces of Queen Elizabeth II's personal jewelry, ranging from the 1,333 stone diamond diadem to the Art Deco Greville emerald kokoshnik, along with rare Tudor pearls, imperial Russian brooches, and the celebrated Nizam of Hyderabad necklace, rest 12 meters beneath the marble hall in a climate-controlled vault connected directly to the palace's own police station. No figure embodies the friction more powerfully than Anne herself. She was barely 18 years old in 1969 when she first appeared in public unaccompanied, presiding over the opening of a rehabilitation facility in Shropshire. And in 1987, her mother conferred upon her the historic designation of Princess Royal, formally recognizing a schedule of duties that now leads the entire royal household in annual engagements, exceeding 400 each year. Elizabeth's courtiers frequently remarked on the quiet understanding between mother and daughter. It was Anne who received Yakima Park in 1976, and later the three-strand pearl necklace the Queen wore without exception for every Christmas broadcast. Yet, under English intestacy rules, children may claim a statutory entitlement only after a spouse's first £322,000 and half of whatever remains. Because assets transferred from sovereign to sovereign are shielded from the United Kingdom's 40% inheritance tax, Charles received the entirety, property, investment portfolios, and the subterranean jewel repository without paying a single penny to His Majesty's Revenue and Customs. What was once an accepted legal arrangement is beginning to acquire the appearance of favoritism in practice. Courtiers whisper that Queen Camilla has championed a one-crown philosophy, under which the late Queen's personal gemstones are considered most effective when maintained together in the service of the reigning couple. Her stylists have already conducted private test fittings with the elegant meander bandeau tiara. Its Greek key design, insiders say, complements Camilla's silver blonde coiffure admirably. Those trial sessions did not escape Anne's notice. The princess regards the bandeau as a personal heirloom connecting her to her paternal grandmother. Prince Edward, elevated recently to the Dukedom of Edinburgh, has expressed support for a middle path. Unseal the will for the non-sanctioned heirs, meaning himself and Anne, while continuing to exclude Prince Andrew, who remains sidelined by scandal. Palace aides drafted a written memorandum advancing precisely that proposal. Yet the king, citing the weight of state business, deferred the matter not once but 3 times. One aide characterized the atmosphere as tea-room polite on the surface and barrister-grade hostile beneath. To many people in Britain, the argument might resemble little more than a gilded sibling rivalry. Constitutional scholars, however, caution against that dismissal. The monarchy's moral standing, they contend, depends on fair and transparent conduct within its own household. If disclosure is withheld from those closest to the institution, to say nothing of the general public, on what grounds can the House of Windsor insist on accountability from elected politicians? As this account will demonstrate, the jewels are merely the visible fragments of a far deeper fracture. Camilla's assent, Charles's consolidation of royal authority, and a long-suppressed debate over whether sustained service rather than bloodline alone should determine who inherits the visible symbols of British continuity are all converging at once. Before you go any further, if you have found this account thoughtful and well-researched, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. New episodes in this series arrive each week, and the story ahead becomes considerably more layered. When Prince Philip passed away, Sir Andrew McFarlane, at the time the president of the Family Division of the High Court, ruled that his will must be secured within a High Court strong room for a minimum of 90 years, formalizing a convention that had been applied to every senior royal since 1910. 12 months later, executors acting for Queen Elizabeth II obtained an identical ruling. That document now rests inside a sealed envelope held at the Royal Courts of Justice, its contents known only to two presiding judges and a palace solicitor. For the broader Windsor family, the symbolism is stark. The family renowned for balcony appearances cannot read their own mother's final wishes. A retired courtier described the situation to this correspondent as follows. It is the sensation of standing locked outside your own home, except the home happens to be a vault and the keyhole has been welded shut. Why 90 years? In 2023, the judiciary published a rare procedural guide on the matter. Only when a professional archivist from the Royal Archives certifies that historical importance outweighs personal privacy can a royal will be unsealed, and even then the public may receive nothing more than an edited summary. Supporters of the convention argue that the arrangement shields descendants from prurient examination. Critics maintain that it transforms opacity into a tool for resolving intra-family disputes in favor of whoever currently holds power. English inheritance law draws a distinct boundary between the Crown Estate, which belongs to the public, the duchies, which occupy a quasi-public position, and personal property. Jewels such as the diamond diadem or the Nizam of Hyderabad necklace fall into the personal category. Yet once they pass from sovereign to sovereign, they activate a 1993 memorandum exempting them from the United Kingdom's 40% inheritance tax. In practical terms, the king may lawfully retain every stone without remitting a single pound to His Majesty's revenue and customs, a privilege entirely unavailable to his siblings. At this point, the Inheritance, Provision for Family Independence, Act 1975 becomes relevant. Section 1 of that act empowers the children of a deceased individual to apply to the courts for reasonable financial provision if they consider that a will, or the absence of one, leaves them without fair support. A successful application would compel disclosure of at least part of the sealed schedule of assets. Lawyers advising Prince Edward have drafted papers invoking the act. However, initiating litigation against a reigning monarch is, as one constitutional barrister described it privately, a grenade with a very short fuse. The sovereign cannot be compelled to give evidence in his own courts, which means any case would turn entirely on whether the court is prepared to order discovery through alternative means. Behind the legal maneuvering stands Queen Camilla, whose advisors have long advocated a single treasury approach. Retain Elizabeth's most historically significant pieces under the control of the ruling couple, maximizing flexibility for ceremonial occasions. Private fittings with the Greville Kokoshnik and with Anne's treasured meander bandeau have circulated through stylist messaging groups, accelerating talk of appropriation. One senior dresser described the strategy as costume diplomacy, except that the price is paid entirely in family goodwill. The secrecy is no longer a matter confined to domestic disagreement. Campaigners in Scotland have already cited the royal tax exemption while lobbying to remove Charles's stamp duty relief on his Balmoral properties. Constitutional scholars warn that the monarchy's contemporary mandate, service justified through transparency, risks being corroded from within if the king is perceived to be accumulating untaxed wealth that his mother intended for wider distribution. 3 pathways are being examined at present. The first involves private mediation, in which palace aides would broker a confidential sharing arrangement, granting Anne a life loan of the pieces most closely associated with her public work, while keeping formal ownership within the royal collection. The second involves limited unsealing, whereby a judge would allow partial disclosure to Edward and Anne under binding confidentiality, meeting the Act's reasonable provision standard without requiring an open hearing. The third, and most combustible, involves open confrontation. Should mediation fail entirely, Edward could petition under the 1975 Act. While the Crown may challenge jurisdiction, the spectacle of an heir pursuing legal action against his reigning brother would transport the dispute from questions of tax exemption and tiara fittings into headlines reaching well beyond the palace gates. Deep beneath the marble floors of Buckingham Palace, a network of climate-controlled chambers maintains a constant forensic temperature of 22 degrees Celsius. In the innermost of these rooms, fingerprint scanners guard 40 velvet-lined drawers. Each drawer carries an index card typed on a vintage Remington machine. No computers are permitted. Together, the cards catalog approximately 400 personal jewels that once belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. The drawers are organized not by monetary value but by provenance. Wedding presents from 1947. State diadems. Greville bequests. Sir Christopher Geidt, the late Queen's former principal private secretary, described the room as a silent memoir written in diamonds. It is that memoir which now sits at the heart of the Windsor fracture because jewels carry truths that a sealed will cannot. Elizabeth's story opens with the diamond diadem, forged in 1820 for King George IV. The circlet holds 1,333 stones that catch daylight like frost settling on iron railings. Elizabeth wore it on every journey to the state opening of Parliament, its 4-carat yellow diamond catching the light above the window of the state Bentley. Curators attribute its mystique as much to repetition as to rarity. From Victoria to Elizabeth, the diadem came to serve as shorthand for constitutional continuity itself. Camilla's stylists, according to palace sources, have already requested test mounts to confirm that the frame suits the new queen's hairstyle, a practical exercise that nevertheless produces audible unease in Anne's apartment. A more nakedly financial symbol of dynastic power rests in a separate tray marked Cullinan relics. Here lies the brooch the late queen affectionately called Granny's Chips. Cullinan III, a 94.4-carat pear-shaped stone suspended above Cullinan IV, a 63.6-carat cushion-cut diamond. The twin stones were cleaved from the largest gem diamond ever extracted from the earth and together command estimates as extraordinary as 180 million pounds. Their scale renders them effectively uninsurable. They travel exclusively under armed escort and have appeared in public on fewer than 12 occasions. Royal gemologists have noted that the brooch's platinum settings were adjusted in 1961 after Princess Anne, then a small child, reached up and tugged at the pin while playing beside her mother. Elizabeth recounted the episode with genuine amusement. Today, the same anecdote strengthens the case for Anne's personal connection to the piece. The collection's emotional peak may belong not to a crown but to a necklace. In 1947, the fabulously wealthy Nizam of Hyderabad cabled Cartier with an instruction that has become the stuff of royal legend: let the bride choose. The future queen selected a spray of roses tiara and a breathtaking riviere of pave petals, known today as the Nizam of Hyderabad necklace. Contemporary valuers place the piece at approximately 66 million pounds, placing it among the most costly privately held jewels anywhere on Earth. Elizabeth wore it sparingly, its luminosity almost too intense for electric light, but photographs from a 1952 film premiere show Princess Anne, then 2 years of age, transfixed by the reflections dancing across her mother's gown. People close to Anne report that she keeps a framed copy of that photograph on her writing desk at Gatcombe Park, a private reminder that jewels can be memories long before they become assets. If the Hyderabad diamonds speak of romance, the Greville Emerald Kokoshnik carries the scent of intrigue. The society hostess Dame Margaret Greville bequeathed the tiara to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, in 1942, expressly for her use and enjoyment, phrasing that contemporaries understood as a mechanism for sidestepping wartime inheritance levies. Set with a 93.7-carat Colombian emerald and worked in platinum by Boucheron, the piece appeared only occasionally in public until 2018, when Princess Eugenie wore it at her wedding. Last November, Queen Camilla unveiled the Kokoshnik at a Windsor Castle diplomatic reception, triggering a wave of headlines about what commentators called Camilla's Emerald Moment. Historians pointed out that Anne, despite 5 decades of senior royal service, had never once been offered the tiara, not even as a temporary loan. Another convertible masterpiece is Queen Mary's Fringe tiara, engineered on a spring-loaded frame so precise it can collapse entirely into a diamond collar. The piece famously broke on Elizabeth's wedding morning, requiring a police-escorted dash to Gerard's workshop. The repaired circlet later graced Princess Anne in 1973 and Princess Beatrice in 2020. Its capacity to transform from tiara to necklace exemplifies what jewelers describe as the utility aristocratic aesthetic of the 1910s. Critics argue that such adaptability, so evidently suited to working royals of Anne's kind, makes a compelling case for distributing access rather than concentrating ownership. Older still are the Medici pearls, a warm strand of 16th century orbs worn repeatedly by Elizabeth I and later restrung for her 20th century namesake. Unlike diamonds, natural pearls absorb the oils of the skin, deepening in color over decades. Microscopic spectroscopy has confirmed that the nacre of these pearls carries traces of Renaissance cosmetics. Anne has reportedly asked that the strand remain on public display whenever it is not required for official photography, a position her brother has yet to endorse. The inventory sheets indicate at least 63 tiaras, 90 brooches, 70 pairs of earrings, and 200 assorted necklaces, bracelets, and hairpins. Gemologists at the Royal Collection Trust estimate that the personal trove could rival the crown jewels in outright market value were any of it ever offered at auction, though its cultural worth defies simple pricing. Within the palace, the list is sometimes referred to as the deep grammar of monarchy, each glittering noun a reference point that only those fluent in heraldic custom can properly parse. For Princess Anne, the grammar is entirely practical rather than poetic. She tends to favor the aquamarine pine flower tiara, a gift from her grandmother, and the low-profile diamond festoon, both selected because they remain stable during military parades in high wind. One aide once joked that Anne treats tiaras like hard hats, safety equipment for the duty site. That sensibility explains why public sympathy for her position runs so deep. When viewers see Anne presenting gallantry awards in coastal drizzle, her complexion ruddy and her demeanor untroubled, they see a woman who has earned a right to her mother's keepsakes rather than simply inherited a claim to them. Camilla's increasingly frequent appearances in showpiece diadems, by contrast, feeds a counter-narrative of acquisition. Royal observers still recall a remark she made to a stylist, overheard and subsequently leaked, to the effect that the meander bandeau sits beautifully against silver hair. The comment might have dissolved into the general background noise had it not coincided precisely with King Charles's most recent postponement of the Wills family reading. Every televised appearance now generates circumstantial evidence for what Prince Edward privately calls the audit of suspicion. That audit is informing legal planning. Lawyers advising Edward have traced provenance chains demonstrating how many marquee pieces, including the Cullinan brooch, the fringe tiara, and the Hyderabad necklace, entered the collection at moments of public celebration rather than sovereign succession. Their argument is that jewels rooted in national ritual belong, at least in the moral sense, to the branch of the family that continues to perform that ritual most conscientiously. By that reasoning, Anne is not merely a potential beneficiary. She is the living vehicle through which the gems continue to carry meaning across the Commonwealth. Yet monarchy ultimately trades on perception as readily as on precedent. Should Charles concede even a modest redistribution, observers will describe it as enlightened stewardship. Hold firm, and the public perception hardens toward hoarding. Supporters of Anne circulate the idea that she would accept a lifetime loan arrangement, legal title remaining with the king, custodial rights extending to her. Camilla's advisors fear that any concession of that kind would establish a precedent, emboldening even Prince Andrew to advance a petition of his own. London has always learned its kings and queens not from textbooks but from flashes of light. Diamonds refracting the lamps of Westminster Hall, emeralds blazing green against the crimson of a horse-drawn coach, pearls trembling beneath the studio lighting of a Christmas broadcast. Every public appearance of a royal jewel transforms an object of metallurgy into a passage of collective memory. And memory is now the arena in which the Windsor succession dispute is being decided. In 1953, the crowds lining the Mall watched the newly crowned Queen Elizabeth II proceed toward Westminster Abbey wearing the diamond diadem. Its 1,333 stones, the shamrock and thistle worked in brilliant cut diamonds, caught the light with such ferocity that newspaper photographers complained of overexposed negatives. The moment pressed the diadem onto postage stamps, banknotes, and biscuit tins, and Elizabeth made it her uniform for every state opening of Parliament that followed. The diadem's unbroken attendance, 70 years without a single missed session, trained the British public to read its glare as confirmation that the constitutional mechanism was functioning as intended. When the same circlet appeared on the silver curls of Queen Camilla at Charles's first state opening, applause inside the Peers Gallery briefly drowned out the knock of Blackrod. Yet outside, camera lenses moved not to the diamonds but to the absence of Princess Anne, who that particular morning was inspecting a lifeboat station on Anglesey. Commentators wondered aloud whether the nation might have found it easier to accept the diadem on the head of the sibling, known for 430 engagements per year. The exchange exposed how rapidly ownership and symbolism can separate. The king may store the diadem in his vault, yet a considerable portion of the public apparently holds it in Anne's silhouette. No jewel sharpens that tension more pointedly than the Greville Emerald Kokoschnik. When Camilla introduced it at a diplomatic reception last winter, viewers found themselves recalling that the tiara had last been seen on Princess Eugenie's wedding veil, an association with youth and bloodline that sat oddly against its sudden reappearance on a queen consort. Social media immediately paired photographs of Camilla's expression with the hashtags tiara snatch and give Anne her emeralds, accumulating 3 million impressions before daylight. Inside the palace, the rotation was defended as logistical necessity. Camilla's dresser argued that only the queen consort could safely test the weight and comfort of the piece in advance of a forthcoming Commonwealth tour with Anne committed to New Zealand and Catherine to Canada. The explanation failed to satisfy Prince Edward, who pointed out that Dame Margaret Greville had specified Her Majesty's use and enjoyment, a phrase that, in his reading, was never intended to exclude the late Queen's own daughter. The legal nuance is dry, the optics are crystalline. Every occasion on which Camilla appears in another historic tiara sharpens the outline of the woman who is not wearing it. The emotional stakes climb whenever the Nizam of Hyderabad necklace enters the conversation. Cartier's cascade of diamond petals, valued at approximately £66 million, rarely leaves its case. Elizabeth herself wore it on fewer than a dozen occasions across 8 decades. When reports circulated that Charles was considering lending the necklace to Catherine, Princess of Wales, for the Nigerian state banquet in March, tabloids described the prospect as soft power in jewel form. Opposition commentators simply asked whether the consort of a continent struggling with poverty should be seen wearing a piece gifted by one of history's most extravagantly wealthy princes. In the event, Catherine arrived in sapphire silk and the Belgian sapphire tiara, as confirmed by Town & Country magazine. The Hyderabad remained in its case, proof perhaps that certain stones have acquired too much political weight to be safely deployed. Some jewels, however, outlast controversy by adapting. Queen Mary's fringe. Tiara is constructed on a hinge so finely engineered that it folds entirely into a diamond collar. The tiara snapped on Elizabeth's wedding. Mourning was repaired and was later fastened into Anne's hair in 1973. When Beatrice borrowed the same piece under the particular constraints of 2020, viewers saw in the lineage a thread of perseverance, a line of fracture followed by repair, not unlike the pattern families recognize in themselves. In today's inheritance dispute, the tiara's geometry has acquired the weight of metaphor, royal diamonds that can bend without fracturing, provided the hinge is maintained. Camilla's allies counter that symbolism operates in both directions. They point to the image of Charles placing the state diadem on his wife's head moments before she greeted Commonwealth youth volunteers. In that instant, they argue, the object ceased to belong to the past and became the instrument of a new monarchical partnership whose commitments extend to mental health advocacy and literacy initiatives. The strategy, conveyed quietly through private secretary corridors, is to future-proof the collection through frequent, purposeful use, making the jewels so visually associated with the current reign that any later redistribution would read in public memory as removal from the national story, not as restoration. Against that media strategy stands Anne's austere practicality. She prefers the aquamarine pine flower, among the lightest royal tiaras, gentle on the neck during cavalry reviews, and has been heard to say that if the jewels are running the show has lost its purpose. Her team maintains a spreadsheet documenting how many times each piece has appeared in photographs alongside citations for military valor or fundraising milestones. Those records underpin Edward's contingency to argue in any 1975 Act proceedings that functional deployment of jewels by a working royal generates an equitable interest deserving formal legal recognition. Legal scholars remain divided. Some observe that English equity has long acknowledged constructive trust claims, situations where an asset is managed for shared benefit. Others reply that the sovereign's immunity is the law's own hinge, one that cannot be folded at will. Yet even the most cautious barristers concede that modern monarchy is adjudicated daily in the court of images. When Anne stepped onto a North Sea oil platform last month, dressed in a navy beret and a 30-pound brooch, tabloids ran side-by-side photographs with Camilla's Kokoschnik appearance. One headline read, "Hard hat versus crown." Another, "Princess earns, Queen wears." Images, unlike wills, are already public. History suggests that jewels can absorb political meaning and still outlast their disputes. The diamond diadem has witnessed Catholic emancipation, imperial jubilees, blitz bombings, and the disruptions of Brexit. Each era projected its discontents onto its facets, only for the next generation to polish them away. But that cycle depends on rotation. The diadem passes from head to head, each wearer adding a layer of association while surrendering monopoly. Should the present deadlock calcify that rotation, Camilla exclusive and Anne sidelined, the gems risk becoming emblems not of continuity, but of confiscation. The palace press office will state only that options remain under active consideration. Now, if you would like to follow every development in this story as it unfolds, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. This series will continue tracking the legal, financial, and personal dimensions of the Windsor inheritance question, and each new installment adds evidence you will not find assembled anywhere else in one place. The jewel dispute has ceased to be a subplot. It is now the lens through which the public interprets every action the House of Windsor takes. Palace officials concede that delay and denial have only intensified the impression that King Charles III and Queen Camilla are ring-fencing history and drawing on it like a private account. Behind closed doors, three conclusions are being modeled, each carrying risks sufficient to redefine the monarchy's claim on legitimacy. The first conclusion is controlled disclosure. A sealed room reading would allow Princess Anne and Prince Edward to view their mother's specific bequests, though not to take possession of them. Lawyers believe this could satisfy the 1975 Act before any petition is formally filed, while keeping the contents away from the general public. The danger lies in the possibility of leakage. A single page photographed on a mobile device would detonate across global news feeds within the hour. The second conclusion is litigation. Edward petitions the High Court for reasonable provision, requiring the sovereign's private solicitor to defend a degree of secrecy without precedent in living memory. Because the Crown cannot be compelled to testify, the case would turn entirely on whether the court is prepared to order discovery. A summons alone would puncture the aura of royal infallibility. A judgment against the king would shatter it. The third conclusion is strategic generosity. Charles voluntarily loans selected heirlooms, perhaps the Medici pearls or the pine flower tiara, to Anne for the duration of her life, banking on the optics of a visible gesture of fraternity to calm the headlines without requiring the vault ledger to be opened. Insiders warn, however, that leaving Prince Andrew without any provision invites a second round of grievances, and that loan arrangements remain revocable, leaving a permanent suspicion that generosity today can be withdrawn tomorrow. The Crown persists by persuading its subjects that grandeur and service are inseparable. Pull them apart, and diamonds become costume. For now, the vault doors remain sealed. The Remington Index continues to clack only in curatorial hands, but pressure accumulates with every public appearance of every contested piece. As one senior private secretary confided to a trusted colleague, "If we will not admit, light voluntarily, the cracks will admit it anyway." Whether the family ultimately selects disclosure, courtroom confrontation, or symbolic generosity, the decision will send consequences far beyond the limestone walls of Buckingham Palace. The jewels have always functioned as metaphors. It may not be long before they serve as verdicts. If this story has given you something to think about, please take a moment to leave a comment below. Do you believe the sealed will is a matter of private family grievance, or does the public have a legitimate interest in how the late Queen's possessions have been handled? Share your thoughts, subscribe if you have not already done so, and we will continue this story in the next episode.